William,
Hey,
Guillermo.
what's up, Josh?
This is fun.
This is fun.
I like this. Okay, so welcome to Cyber Sunday School. You know me, you know Will. We do this every day and not on film.
That's true.
So I'm excited for other people to get to experience the wit and wisdom of William.
Yeah.
You don't usually say much that isn't sung for these people.
And scripted.
That's true. Yeah.
So we'll see how this goes.
All right. So today we get to talk about living stones and the temple and First Peter, elect exiles. Do you have any sort of opening remarks about all that stuff? Just something you're like, I am interested in X.
Well, I think you might run with this one, but I'm interested in. I haven't finished connecting the dots, both between the psalm that is quoted, that the stone that was rejected has become the cornerstone. I feel like often psalm quotes in the New Testament are a call to the whole song. So I feel like there's a lot to dig into there. And I'm also intrigued by its connections to Revelation 21.
Tell us more about that.
Well, I don't know fully yet, but in John's vision of the new heavens and the new earth, he kind of equates the whole new heavens and the new earth with the garden city temple vision. And it's really, like, I just started G.K. Beale's book on all of this stuff, where he tries to parse out what John's actually talking about there, because it seems like that final ultimate garden city temple is the culmination of all of the kinds of dwelling places that God has had throughout all of Scripture.
Yeah.
And they all kind of point in different ways to that culmination.
Can you give us just sort of a 30,000 foot view on what those different pieces might be so that people can connect those dots? Because, when we talk about like the temple and the church and the people and the building, we use a lot of those things interchangeably.
Yeah.
How does the Bible kind of pull that theme from beginning to end? What's different about what happens in Revelation and maybe what in Genesis and moving forward?
Yeah, okay. Well, basically, the whole story of Scripture is God condescending to his creation. And it's first really kind of easy for him to do because he creates us in the garden, sets aside the garden out of a wild creation, and puts us in there and dwells with us there. When that relationship becomes fractured because of the fall, he continues to condescend and speak in human language with us. And so first that looks like calling people out and making a people unto himself, and then finding different ways to dwell among them, and with more and more fullness as Revelation continues. So I want to say it starts with the tabernacle, probably, right? It starts with his provision of like a traveling way for him to be with his people who are newly freed from slavery in Egypt. And then with all of that is the continuing promise he's made to his people that they, one, would be a people, and two, that they would have a place, a people and a place. And so he gives them the promised land. It's called the promised land because it was part of his promise. And in the middle of this, or at the kind of center of it, religiously, politically, culturally, is a more permanent dwelling place where he puts his presence with his people. When the tabernacle was traveling with the people of God, they said that his presence was in the tabernacle. And so kind of in this concentric series of tents, you're more nearer and nearer to God's presence. Well, the temple is kind of the permanent tabernacle and has a similar setup. So when we get to, I don't know, it feels like I just want to keep the spoilers. It's just so beautiful.
Go for it.
Because when we get to First Peter, when we get to the church, when we get to, especially as First Peter articulates the church, we see that what had been these really apparently not permanent, like the temple gets torn down at 73 AD, something like that. All of these things that had seemed like the permanent dwelling place of God, finally we've arrived, the Jews thought, with the temple. God, in providence, abolishes because he's replaced these dead stones with what First Peter calls living stones. And Jesus is the firstborn from among the dead. He's the first living stone. And he's building us into his dwelling place. So not only does God dwell among us, like he's condescended in Jesus to be a person among us, he has made us into his dwelling place. Mm. And that's another part of how the church is so beautiful. If you looked at the cathedral and there was like one brick missing, you'd really notice that. There'd be just a hole in the side of a cathedral. So in the church, we don't lose our individuality. We become more ourselves. As individually the dwelling place of God, he indwells us by his Spirit. But collectively, we become the place that God lives. And his expression of his reign, his rule, his grace, his power in the world. And that's not new. It's just full. It's final-ish. It points to Revelation.
That's great. Yeah.
It's my first sermon to St. Patrick.
I get really excited about the idea that, when we move from tabernacle to temple, obviously something is gained. We move from being kind of transient and not having a place to there's an institutionalism of the church that is stabilizing. Yeah. I say the church, the assembly, the people of God. That's stabilizing and secure, and it's like God is enthroned in the midst of his peoples in this place that is immovable, unshakable, kind of mountain. Yeah. And they're really excited about that. But also because just the way the metaphor works, you also almost lose something when you move from tabernacle to temple, which is that God's presence, or at least the signifier of God's presence to them, is immobile. It's sort of in a fixed place. Yeah. But the people are in and out. They're moving constantly. Yeah. You've got people who, most of the people don't live in Jerusalem, so they've got to come and do these pilgrimages, which some of them get to do a couple of times a year, but other people don't at all. Yeah. And then there are limited access for different people. And so when you move from the temple being the location to the people themselves being the location in Acts 2 with Pentecost, yes. Now all of a sudden you have the best of both worlds. You've got security of God's presence, but also it's mobile, and so it can do this thing where it fills the earth with God's glory, which is our whole point. Can you maybe parse out for us a little bit the difference between, when I say access to God, obviously what happened in the temple and then what's happening in the church, there's a difference in access there. What does that look like?
Yeah. Access in the temple was limited. It's not as if people couldn't directly and personally pray to God, but it was mediated by a priest. And so this, designated, the whole tribe of Israel really would be the people who would go and speak to God on the people's behalf. And they would then also kind of be among God's people as a mediation of what he's like, of his presence. And so what I love about 1 Peter, especially this chapter, this passage, is he, instead of the priesthood being a tribe, he's now calling his whole church a royal priesthood. And usually often we'll hear that appealed to as I don't need any other mediator than Jesus between me and God. And that's true. But I think that the real thrust of that passage is instead really the final, most beautiful expression to me, one of them, of God's condescension to dwell among us. He condescended to Israel to form them into a people and to communicate with them. But Israel was also one of his greatest condescensions to the nations, to all of us, because they existed as a picture of what God is like. And I think that there was, if you look at the creation myth, if you look at the cultural laws, the ritual and civic laws that look so weird to us, they spoke fluent ancient Near Eastern. And there are all these little tweaks that God in that law makes to the surrounding cultures that were oppressive and violent and awful, that spoke in their language, this is what God is like. This is what the real power at the core of all that lives is really like. And so that's not different in the church. It's just totally full. Like, we are now this peculiar presentation of what God is actually like, that we speak with fluency, whatever. We are fluent in the language of our local culture and lives. But we have this way about us, as we're more and more influenced by the Spirit and changed into the image of Christ, where the world goes kind of like, you look like me, but you don't look like me. It's kind of this doggy head tilt thing, like, what is that? And it's an attraction. It's often repulsion too, as we're told we're going to suffer. But we exist now as little remote tabernacles that mediate for people what God feels like to be around.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't need a confessor. I don't need to go into a booth to tell someone to then tell God my sins. But I can be with someone confessing their sin or confessing my sin, and they can be for me a presence like Jesus that says, you know what, it's not okay, but I forgive you. And I can be an expression of God's forgiveness to you. That's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
That's great. Do you remember the story about the two little boys who are they're Catholic school boys, and they're pulled in to the principal's office, or the Monsignor, and one by one, and so the one goes in there, and this Monsignor looks him in the eye, and he says, "Where is God?" Have you heard this?
No.
And the little boy just kind of like, he's still, and he's kind of panicking. He's not quite sure how to process what's happening, so he's silent. And again, Monsignor says, "Where is God?" And the little boy jumps up and runs out of the room, and the other boy runs after him, and they're running down the hall, and the little boy who'd been sitting out in the waiting room goes, "What's going on?" And the boy that was in with the Monsignor says, "God's missing, and they think we have something to do with it."
That's awesome.
So I love that story for a lot of reasons, but I always imagine that "where is God" question as one of the driving motivators for a lot of human activity.
Yeah.
Where is God? You
Totally.
know, Chesterton said that every man who knocks on the door of a brothel is looking
Absolutely.
for God.
Yeah.
We're always looking for where He is, and historically we've been able to say. We've been able to point at a building and say, that's where God is. You know, He dwells there. He tabernacles there.
Yes.
And there's these limits of access that we have.
Yeah.
You've got to be from a certain tribe, and you've got to be you got to pull the lots to be able to serve, and you've got to be male, and you have to have all of these requirements in order to get into the really nice places.
Yeah.
And then Peter is just saying the absolute opposite to these people. Like, it's all of you. You have, and that's not because we were wrong before. It's because of what Jesus has done.
Absolutely.
He tore the dividing wall down, which is how Paul talks about it in Ephesians, and he ripped the veil in two. And so now there's all this access where we look at people and we can say, and especially when two or more of them are gathered together, there is God.
Absolutely.
He's there. I love that.
Me
And
too.
I love how this passage kind of pulls all that stuff
Yeah.
together. So what do you have any idea what we're going to be singing as we're studying this passage?
You would ask that, wouldn't you?
I would.
I did pick some. I forgot what they are.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head. You'll have to come or watch. I don't remember. I do remember that I forgot. So we'll figure it out. We'll see. I can't remember. But I do. One thing, I mean, probably Holy, Holy, Holy. Because, but I might do it this week because Jim's talking about holiness. Anyway, the other, there's the song quote, right, from Psalm 118. And then there's also a pull from Isaiah, I think it's 28, 22, I can't remember. But in this 1 Peter 2 passage. But that also points to another image of the temple that is going to become true of us as God's people. That He will dwell in us in the same way that He dwells in the temple in Isaiah 6. And it will be awe-inspiring, and we will be filled to overflowing. Like His robe, the train of His robe fills the temple. His presence will overwhelmingly dwell in the church and spill out into the world. That's kind of the vision of this thing.
Mhm.
And it really comes to culmination, I think,
Yeah.
in the Garden City and in Revelation 21.
We do one that's like Jesus with Thy Church Abide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
That like reminds me of that.
Yeah, you're right.
Parting shots, Will?
It's good to be a living stone.
It is good to be a living stone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll play some Rolling Stones. I don't know.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
See you guys soon.